On the contrary, from Britain to the Caribbean, the descendants of slaves today have a far better and higher. There's that currently approximately 7 in every 1,000 Africans is a slave. 10 million people. In 2017, CNN reported hundreds of slaves are sold every week.
And this is why when people talk about this stuff, I feel like people just are either being greedy and just want some money.
Rafe Hadel Manku to take the floor. Rafe is an author, broadcaster and historian specialising in British institutions, the monarchy and the Commonwealth realms. From the BBC to ABC, Rafe is a well-known commentator in national and international media. He is a trustee of the Royal Canadian Heritage Trust and a senior fellow at the New Cultural Forum think tank. Rafe, the floor is yours.
Right. Round 2. I've been on the winning side of every debate, apart from one at the University of East Sussex over the years, but I somehow suspect that this may not be following along those previous lines, but let's see how we go here. It's a great pleasure to be invited back to this august chamber and to see such a full house and a very enthusiastic, if not energetic, crowd here today. It's been 7 years since I was last here, and university campuses and this chamber were rather quieter in those days, and undoubtedly one of the factors that's contributed to this increased passion is the emotion that envelops topics like colonialism and empire, and I say this also as a child of empire. But, in recent months we've seen the issue of slavery and colonialism expand beyond campuses, as we've now got, of course, from Barbados to Jamaica, prominent Caribbeans also calling for Britain to pay reparations for slavery and the consequences of colonialism.
Reparations.
And Madam Speaker, were we engaged in this debate in 1807 or 1833, I likely would have crossed the floor to support the motion opposite, because, of course, the victims of the horrendous horrors of slavery would have been alive and deserving of damages. But it's not 1807, it's not 1907, it's not even 2007. Over 2 centuries have passed since Britain led the world as the first empire in history to abolish slavery, and the right of reparations died long ago, because reparations are fundamentally about matters of tort law. The purposes of damages, restoration of reparation, is to restore the victim, the slave, to the position they were in before the damage occurred, slavery. The actual victim only can receive damages, not their descendants. And therein lies the rub, because some 6 or 7...
And this is a problem that I hear when I hear the term reparations. I wouldn't even say a problem. It's more so like a question, because, we like to think about things like, is this possible? Does it make sense? And my thing is this: would it even be possible to pay, all black people reparations? Like, is it like, I'm not even, like, literally, is it possible? Is it even enough money to pay that? Would it make sense? And let's say you do pay every black person, like, within the, I guess the government's, I don't even know if government would be the term. I guess within the country's fiscal limitation, you pay every black person the amount that they can pay without our country sinking financially into debt. How much would that be? Would it be like $100 per black person? Would it be like $200 per black? Would it be $1,000 per black person? And even that, it's not really that much money. It's not a little bit of money, but it's like, all I'm asking is, what would it look like? And what would make it make sense?
Generations separate those alive today from their British Empire slave ancestors. And whilst not just yet, thank you so much. Whilst it's undeniable that 19th century slaves suffered unspeakable horrors, in what way can this lead one to conclude that their great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren are also victims and deserving of reparations too? On the contrary, from Britain to the Caribbean, the descendants of slaves today have a far better and higher quality of life than they would have had their ancestors remained in Africa. And that's an indisputable fact. Well, if you let me carry on, I'll tell you why. Well, first I ask you, is a current descendant of a slave ethically entitled to benefit from their ancestors' sufferings? And who should pay? Is it ethical for an innocent person today to be culpable for the sins of their forefathers? Now, CARICOM, which is the Caribbean body calling for reparations, wants British taxpayers to pay. But why? Out of a population of millions, there were only 3,000 slave owners in Britain. The vast majority of the population of Britain descend from people whose lives were one of abject poverty and hardship, working in hellish conditions akin to serfdom.
I know this video is for Great Britain, but when I hear about reparations, because this is a big, debate even today. My thing is, how would that look? Because by the standard desire for reparations, I would be entitled to them because obviously I am African American. But I don't need them. Like, I genuinely don't need them. Like, I have an amazing life, amazing family, upper middle class, I guess. Like, would I still get them? And who would pay me? Like, all I'm saying is, I literally do not need them. And this is a problem that, I hear, like, when I think of reparations. Would it only go to lower income black families? Would it go to all black families? Would Jay-Z and Beyonce also get reparations? With LeBron James? Do y'all get what I'm saying? Like, where does it stop? And I'm not trying to make fun of the idea. I'm just genuinely curious on, like, what would happen. Like, we giving Kanye West reparations, and we giving their child reparations. Like, I don't know, bro.
Taxpayers pay reparations. It's not just yet. Thank you so much. 16% of the British population is now also foreign-born. So why should they pay for reparations? What about the descendants of slaves living in Britain today? Why should people from Trinidad and Tobago living here pay reparations to people in Jamaica? Then again, why is the demand for reparations always focused and framed in terms of Britain? Why are no activists asking for reparations from the African states that were equally complicit in slavery? Should they not pay reparations? They provided the slaves that were transferred over the ocean, and millions more slaves were kept in slavery in Africa by other Africans, just as were being transported across the Atlantic. Why does nobody ever actually speak about that unpleasant truth? What about the Arabs and the Muslims who bought and sold African slaves for centuries before the British arrived and continued to do so into the 20th century until the...
And when I hear stuff like this is how I know people don't really care about issues, because y'all, I promise I have never heard this information, like, ever in my life. I wouldn't know, like, Muslims had slaves or whatever, and I never even thought of the idea of other countries paying reparations for the slaves they sold. But the reason I paused it is because that he's making a point. And this is how you know people don't really care. They act like they care, but they're just virtue signaling, because they never brought up other countries paying reparations. It literally never even came up. They don't think about it deeply enough to say something like that. They only want it from this country where, let's say it does come from a taxpayer. A lot of people who pay taxes in the country had literally nothing to do with that. I'd argue 99.9% of people who pay taxes in the country had nothing to do with that, or who are immigrants, or who aren't even white. Or let's say you're a rich black person. Like, it's just kind of a maybe I just need to do some research on it, because I try to be objective. Like, maybe I'm looking at it wrong, but I honestly don't think I am.
The British and the French tried to stop it. And indeed, what about the slavery that carries on today? The International Labour Organization says that currently approximately 7 in every 1,000 Africans is a slave. 10 million people. In 2017, CNN reported hundreds of slaves are sold every week in Libya. So much energy is given to historic reparation and the historic plight of slaves. I would have more time for the argument if the people who actively pursuing that course of action, were equally vocal about surely the far more horrendous plight of slaves today, where there are more slaves today in bondage, in slavery, than crossed over the Atlantic. So where are the protests outside the Nigerian High Commission? Where are the protests outside the embassies of Niger, which has 800,000 slaves today? What about Mali and Chad and Sudan and Cameroon? It's almost as if there's an ulterior motivation behind the call for apologies and reparations exclusively from Britain. And how far should we... No, I would love to, and normally I would, maybe a bit later on, but I'm getting into the swing of things now. And how far should we take this? Should Britain seek reparations for the Barbary slaves? 1 million Europeans, at the same time as Africans were going over the Atlantic, 1 million Europeans were enslaved by the Ottoman states of Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. And it carried on after the abolition of the slave trade by the British. Should Britain demand reparations from North Africa? Of course not. It's time to move on, and so should we. But let's turn away from slavery and expand our view to colonialism more broadly. What disadvantage has colonialism actually caused to those living in the former British colonies of the Caribbean? And disadvantage compared to whom? And this is to go back to the point that you asked. Most of the former colonies of the Caribbean are now successful middle-income countries. The GDP per head of the Bahamas is higher than Portugal and is comparable to Spain and Italy. You never hear that, do you?
Wow.
Barbados, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, and other former British slave colonies have higher rankings on the UN's Human Development Index.
And this is why when people talk about this stuff, I feel like people just are either being greedy and just want some money, which we all want some money, don't even lie, we all want some money, or they just are misled. I'm not even going to say delusional. Nah, probably a little delusional. They're just very, very misled when it comes to talking about reparations and all that other stuff.
Many other Spanish-speaking South American countries. How has the British Empire disadvantaged the Caribbean nations? It's not clear to me. But let's test this further, and let's go and look and compare the nations of the Caribbean with modern West Africa, the original homelands of Caribbean slaves, to see what life is like there. GDP per capita in Benin is $1,430. In Barbados, it's $17,000, over 10 times higher. Life expectancy in Benin is 62, in Barbados it is 79. Rather than writing checks to well-off areas of the world, why not focus on countries and areas that are actually impoverished and require aid? Financial aid not attached to alleged attempts to cleanse one's soul. It can't be clearer. While slavery was abhorrent for those who were enslaved, had they stayed in Africa, the lives of their descendants today would be unquestionably worse. So what exactly actually is Britain being asked to pay reparations for? Because Britain wasn't the first empire in Africa, in India, in the Americas, but it was the most benign, and the benefits from it far exceed those, for example, of the Islamic and Indian empires that carved up India, of the Ashanti Empire, of the Dahomey Kingdom, and all of the hundreds and thousands of slaves that were ritually sacrificed every year in Benin. And the Benin Bronzes were mentioned. The Benin Bronzes commemorates those who actually owned slaves. So whilst on the one hand I can understand why you would protest Coulston's statue, why is there a celebration of the Benin Bronzes when they also commemorate slave owners? So why are we apologizing for Britain? Are we apologizing to Britain for introducing nutrition and food storage policies that led to a decline in the science? It was the British that...
This guy just went off, bro. Like, the students behind him are pissed. And he just went off for like 10 minutes straight. But if you have any thoughts on this or any suggestions, comment down below. It's LFR Jojo, and I'll see you on the next one.